All right. Well, welcome everyone watching on either YouTube or Facebook, as well as welcome here. We're in the book of Proverbs in a maybe a little bit different way of looking at it, because the title of the total 31 weeks is a return to common sense. And if there's anything we need in the world right now, it's a little bit of common sense. And I'm seeing that reappear all over the place. I saw another one today when an elected official came on and he was talking about his field of expertise. And he said, we're just returning to common sense. We're in the book of Proverbs chapter 19 tonight. And I'm going to give an answer here to some of our folks who have been looking up some verses. The word listen is found in verses, well, in the form of listen, you can put down verses 20 and 27, although one is just the word listen. Then the second pillar of wisdom is, of the seven, is the fear of the Lord, which is found in verse 23. But then it also is alluded to in verse 16, because it says it's really the fear of the Lord there. It's just not named it, but I'm looking for the actual words, the fear of the Lord. The next one is counsel, and that's found in verse 20. Understanding is found in verses 28 and 25. Prudence is found in verse 14. And then discretion is found in verse 11. And reproof in the form of chastening. The word chasten is found, I believe it's 18, but it's found actually 18, 25, and 29, whether it's rebuke, chasten. All seven of these. The reason I brought this out is this is the first time we've seen this since chapter 8, that all seven are actually listed by name. We've seen it throughout, sometimes 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 in a proverb. But the reason we say that is in chapters 1 through 8, you have this established. You have these seven established. I mean, and as I've said before, people give different understandings or interpretations of what the seven pillars of the house of wisdom are. But in the first 8 chapters, I believe it's 5 times, you find all of these together, okay? And then you don't see them. Once you hit chapter 9, it talks about them, and then you don't see them in terms of all 7 of them by name until chapter 19. I say that because it shows credence to me to the fact that the 7 pillars should be based on biblical integrity, meaning the context of the first 8 chapters gives you what the 7 are, and then they're repeated throughout. But then again in chapter 19, we have all 7 of them listed again. And again, it's important in your pursuit of wisdom, your pursuit of understanding, to understand that the first of those 7 pillars has to be the ability to listen, okay, which moves then to the second one, the fear of the Lord. You have to, if you're going to get God's wisdom, you have to walk in the fear of the Lord, because God says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of understanding. So once you come to the realization, okay, I've got to really listen to God in this regard, and I have to walk in the fear of the Lord, the respect of what God says is right and what God says is wrong is wrong. And then that moves to the third one, which is counsel, that you have to be willing to hear the counsel of others that can help you in your journey, in your finding of understanding, your finding of wisdom, which moves to the fourth pillar, which is understanding. If you are a listener to God, if you are walking in the fear of God, if you are seeking from others information about their journey, you are creating the foundation of understanding. You will have grown understanding. Matter of fact, you can't go through this program without growth in terms of understanding, because we keep coming back to it over and over again, like a barometer that you can test your own self against these 7 pillars. Maybe you're weak in an area, and you'll say, hey, I'm weak in this area. God, help me in this area. And he'll give you illustrations through the word, through life, that will help you in that, so that your foundation of biblical and godly understanding is established. Once that you're in that process, then the most important 2 things are the next 2 pillars. You got to grow in prudence, and you've got to grow in discretion. Prudence goes back to a Hebrew word which means craftiness. Not crafty in a negative sense of taking advantage of others, but we would say today being streetwise. You've learned from life from a Christian or a godly perspective, and you kind of understand how it works. And so that's why there's so many scams that are going on today. And unfortunately, sometimes those scams can come from a brother or sister of yours who thinks that it's going to really be helpful, so they're trying to get you enlisted in something. And I share, it's never a bad thing to analyze, even when it's a close friend, even when it's a fellow believer. And it's not a bad thing to say, you know what, I hear what you're saying, but I really need to sleep on that. I really need to, think about what you're saying, okay? That's prudence, which then moves to discretion. Prudence is what you are doing inside in your thought process to analyze life situations, the things that are coming into your life. Discretion is your actual movement. It is the actual plan. It's moving out in whatever direction prudence gives you, to learn to be discreet in terms of maybe you know something, but to blurt it out might not be the best way to handle that. Maybe discretion would be to deal with it in a manner that doesn't lose a friend over it, if I can put it that way, okay? And then finally, reproof. That's the seventh pillar. And reproof can be seen as chastisement. It can be seen as a rebuke. What it basically means is that as we're going through life's journey trying to live for God and to glorify Him, that sometimes we have to be reproved by the Lord because of our understandings not where it should be in some area. And so it might be in terms of how we look at other people, how we deal with other people, how we handle living in a world, in a state, a country in which you don't agree with everything. And so you have to learn how to deal with those things. Okay, learning to receive reproof means, hey, sometimes we just have to be corrected. Okay, and so that's why these 7 pillars are important. And as I said, you saw them repeated in chapters 1 through 8. Then chapter 9 revealed these are the 7 pillars. Just have to go back to the first 8 chapters. It repeats itself over and over again, and then it will continue repeating till chapter 19, which is a change. We'll change direction now tonight, because as I shared, if you look at chapter 16, verses 10 through 15, highlighting especially verses 13 through 15, we moved into an area that we saw in chapters 17 and 18 in terms of Solomon giving his son direction on terms of the people that he's going to have around him, the advisors, those that serve him, because they're extremely important to the establishment and continuation of the kingdom. Remember now, King Solomon is the wealthiest guy. We're going to see, I'll make reference tonight to where his wealth came from, a large portion of it. And he's passing all that to his son. And his son's going to have the control of that kingdom. It doesn't necessarily mean that the king and his wife are dead, but they are going to move out of the way. And so the whole concept in Proverbs is him speaking to his son to give him wisdom. And so in those 2.5 chapters, we saw a strong focus on advisors. Now we're going to move actually almost back to the beginning, but at a deeper level. The appearance of these 7 pillars, each of the 7 by name in there, is kind of like moving us back to the beginning. But as you'll see, he's going to handle different areas with his son, and it's going to take us a little bit deeper in terms of understanding where King Solomon is pushing now for his son. Okay, and obviously it's also important to us because each of us is king of our kingdom. And I don't mean that with independence from God. I'm saying that each of us has been given something by God, both the relationships, in some cases a mate, others land of some sort, which can be taken different ways, but what you have in terms of what God has given you, and then even your animals. A righteous man looketh well after his animals. So there are certain areas that God has given us that we're to care for, okay? And 3 of those areas we're to care for are our thoughts, what comes out of our mouth, and our actions. So all those were found we talked about that in chapter 12. Okay, we're going to get right into it now in chapter 19, and we're going to look at verses 1 through 3. Better is the poor who walks in his integrity than one who is perverse in his lips and is a fool. So right off the bat, he's going to juxtapose 2 things, and that is integrity versus foolishness. Okay? And he's going to make a statement. He's going to say, I would rather you have integrity and not have anything. Now, we talked in past, and we'll talk about it again tonight, that he meaning Solomon's son has what I call an inherited advantage. And we're going to see that being spoken about in here a little bit later. He has an inherited advantage. He was born into the family of the king. Okay? So as a result of that, he's going to have passed down to him a whole bunch of stuff. But what he's not going to have passed down to him is wisdom. He can turn out to be a fool. Okay? And yes, and inherited advantage, actually, we're going to see later, inherited advantage can actually cast a spell over you, because that inherited advantage can give you the feeling of, man, it doesn't matter really what happens because I've got all the security. I live in the castle. I'm not living down in the hut. I'm living in the castle. I got these people that are hired to help me and all, and you can end up being a sluggard. That will be dealt with here too. That instead of understanding your advantage and then using it correctly, you can actually use it to take advantage of people, which you're not supposed to do, not from a godly perspective. But we'll get into that. Right now, better is the poor who walks in his integrity than one who is perverse in his lips and is a fool. Also, it is not good for a soul to be without knowledge, and he who sins hastens with his feet. The foolishness of a man twists his way, and his heart frets against the Lord. I mentioned this before. It's really important to look at these verses and see if God has given you a clue to help you to understand the whole thing, so it just doesn't end up being like fortune cookies, that each one has its own meaning apart from the context in which it is. If you look at verses 1 and then at 3, it helps. Better is the poor who walks in his integrity than one who is perverse in his lips and is a fool. The foolishness of a man twists his way, and his heart frets against the Lord. So we're talking about foolishness, okay, and heart fretting against the Lord. I wrote down here, the ordered life built on the 7 pillars versus a life without borders reflected in his speech. Okay, because the perverse guy has no boundaries. He's just going to fly out, okay? Whereas a person that's really walking in the 7 pillars, learning to be prudent and to be discreet, he's going to be minimal on words. He's going to watch, wait, depending on the situation he's in. Also, it is not good for a soul to be without knowledge. Well, we discussed that throughout, okay? And he sins who hastens with his feet. That's simply speaking of a person that does not have prudence and discretion. And so he hastens with his feet. He sees something, he doesn't think about the consequences, he just goes for it. Okay? And again, that's what's being spoken about as we start this 19th chapter of Proverbs. He doesn't want you to respond. He's speaking again to his king, but he's speaking to us too, that we're not to respond simply by emotions and what we want without knowledge. That we have to use knowledge, we have to use understanding, wisdom, discretion in terms of our life. So, and he sins who hastens with his feet, who doesn't think, he just goes for it. Okay? The foolishness of a man twists his way. In other words, it starts creating for him all these twists and turns, which is going to cause eventually misery for himself and probably misery for others. And then he says, and his heart frets against the Lord. What that means is very simple. He blames God. All his problems, the foolish man, all the problems that he's in, he just blames God for it. And there's a classic example that I'll give you here in just a minute. But I wrote here, the fool will constantly be angry with and blame God for his problems. And I give as an illustration chapter 8 of Isaiah. And in this situation, God is speaking to Isaiah. The children of Israel are in disobedience. They're in a bad place. And so God is speaking to Isaiah to keep him from falling in line with what's going on around him. And notice what happens beginning in verse 19. And when they say to you, speaking to Isaiah, seek those who are mediums and wizards who whisper and mutter, should not a people seek their God? Should they seek the dead on behalf of the living? To the law and to the testimony. If they do not speak according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. They will pass through it hard-pressed and hungry, and it shall happen, when they are hungry, that they will be enraged and curse their king and their God and look upward like with a fist. Why did you do this to me? Why is this always going like this for me? Where's the guy? It was his foolishness that got him into the problems. Whatever the issue is that he's dealing with, that he's mad about, it's because he caused it, and then he turns around and blames God. It goes on to say, then they will look to the earth and see trouble and darkness, gloom of anguish, and they will be driven into darkness. Why? Because they're not walking in the fear of the Lord. They're not applying the 7 pillars of wisdom. Wisdom, in chapter 9, verse 1, wisdom has built her house, and she's built it on 7 pillars. And we see in chapters 1 through 8 exactly what they are. And now the king is saying to his son, you've got to do this. You have to seek God for it. And we know Solomon's story in terms of how he sought God for wisdom above all things, and God has now given it to him. Then we go to verse 4. Wealth makes many friends, but the poor is separated from his friend. Again, if we look to the last verse 7, it says, all the brothers of the poor hate him. How much more do his friends go far from him? He may pursue them with words, yet they abandon him. He's talking there about a person that's acting foolishly. Okay, that's the context. We're talking about foolishness versus integrity. And the foolish person will get himself into situations where, because he's in need, maybe he's poor at a certain point, that I'm talking about self-caused poverty, okay, because of his foolishness, that he's going to then go to people and seek to have them help him. We're going to see later that is actually in the same portion is going to deal with the person that has to be gone to repeatedly over and over again, the foolish person who repeats the problem over and over again, and what effect that has on others, okay? Wealth makes many friends, but the poor is separated from his friend because if he's gotten himself in a jam, he's trying to get from them. A false witness will not go unpunished, and he who speaks lies will not escape. If you, through your foolishness, get yourself in a hole, you just may find yourself having to lie to people to get them somehow to help you in the hole that you've gotten yourself into. Now, this is real life experiences. We've all seen this happen. Many entreat the favor of nobility, and every man is a friend to one who gives gifts. Now, what he's been speaking there, we actually talked about this in a different way. But a person that is, say, is a nobility, he has wealth, he's a king, he's a prince, whatever, he is so used to people hitting them up, okay, that they learn through that to be guarded, okay? Many entreat the favor of nobility. Why? Because they got money. If they're in trouble, they're going to go to that person and somehow try to get it. And every man is a friend to one who gives gifts. In other words, you can have the most, how would you say, the least type of friendship. It's not even a friendship, but you met him once, and now you're in trouble. I'm going to go to that guy. I ate at a table with a friend of mine, and he was there, and he knows me by name. In other words, when desperation comes, lying will come, and also stretching what a friendship really is. And every man is a friend to one who gives gifts. All the brothers of the poor hate him. Why? Because they're not in much better of a position, but he's trying to get it from them too, okay? How much more do his friends go far from him? He may pursue them with words, and those words can be anything from begging to trying to put guilt on the person. Hey, I know you just won that lottery thing. Can you just give me $2,000? Well, how many guys win in the lottery, I'm just using that as an example, have all those people coming to them, distant relatives coming, people they've never even met before, the person on the street, trying to take advantage, but in reality, they're foolish. And their foolishness has got them into the predicament in which they find. Again, that's within that total context. So it says, I wrote down here, let's look at verses 4 and 7 together. Foolishness leads to poverty, and poverty leads to asking others for help. But if the person being requested knows that the poverty was caused by repeated foolishness, it will drive a wedge between the foolish person and even blood relatives as well as friends. All of his pleading will not change the outcome. They will walk away from him Verse 5 notes that the foolishness leads to poverty, and because the foolish person is in a vulnerable position, it may lead them to lie and about their situation to escape from their predicament. Verse 6 notes that nobility understands that others may do foolish things, and because the nobility, have money, they are aware that even the weakest of friendships may be exploited in order to plead for money to escape their situation. Okay. Verse 8 really doesn't need any explanation. We've seen this over and over again. This is the groundwork of the whole of Proverbs. He who gets wisdom loves his own soul. So to take the 7 pillars and apply them to your life, he's saying that you love your soul. He's telling his son, you love your soul, you love yourself, you love yourself if you will get wisdom. He who keeps understanding will find good. I mean, that's a basic premise, that God is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. If you live righteously before the Lord, you can come to him in your time of need. You can come to him going through crises. You can come to him in every situation because you're walking righteously before him. Verses 9 and 10. A false witness will not go unpunished, and he who speaks lies shall perish. Okay, notice something there. A false witness will not go unpunished. That was the exact same wording of verse 5. So what does that mean? Look back at the context of verse 5. It's in that context of what I was just sharing with you, okay? A false witness will not go unpunished, and he who speaks lies shall perish. I think those last 2 words are different from verse 5, but it's the same thing. Luxury is not fitting for a fool, much less for a servant to rule over princes. So he's giving them a fact there, okay? Luxury is not fitting for a fool. Why? Because the fool's going to lose it. Remember, old King Solomon's passing all this down, okay? And he is remember, Queen of Sheba comes and visits him. All these people from all over the world are coming because of his wisdom. And it says that when they came bearing gifts, gold, silver, jewels, animals. They brought all this stuff, and so he became, I guess you would say, the wealthiest man on the earth. I mean, we don't know that for sure, but I would say he's pretty wealthy from what we can get out of Scripture. Luxury is not fitting for a fool, I will put in their son, much less for a servant to rule over princes. If you play the fool, you may have a servant that's wiser than you, and it's not supposed to be that way. That your own servant is making wise decisions and you're making foolish decisions? Come on. You've had every advantage in life handed to you. Okay? That's basic. So don't let inherited advantage cast a spell over you. Verses 11 and 12. The discretion of a man makes him slow to anger, and his glory is to overlook a transgression. The king's wrath is like the roaring of a lion, but his favor is like dew on the grass. So let's take a look at this one in depth. The discretion of a man makes him slow to anger, and his glory is to overlook a transgression. Think about the pressures on a king, especially if he's playing the fool and he picks advisors for him that instead of helping him are actually making the situation worse. And they're coming to him. Remember, I think it was in week 1 or 2, a wise counselor helps to have the king not to jump out there in wrath, but tries to cool him down, okay? But if you got the wrong advisors around you, he did this to you. He deserves to die. If you remember when Shimei, one of the grandkids or cousins, whatever, of Saul, came against David. As David was young at this point. He wasn't king yet, or he'd just taken the kingship. And so Shimei's throwing dirt at him, throwing rocks at him, and saying, "You dirty this and that. You've taken this from, basically from King Saul." So David's right-hand man says, "Let me go take his head off." Got a nice long, so let me go just take his head off. What did David say? He said, "No, don't touch him. Perhaps God has sent him to basically rebuke me, and he will look favorably upon my transgressions because I'm not doing anything to him." See, that's what is implied here when it says the discretion of a man makes him slow to anger, and his glory is to overlook a transgression. If he's going to be king of a kingdom, he's going to handle it either like a dictator, or he's going to handle it as what the King Solomon is saying here, a beneficent leader. And by that, what I mean is he's going to put yourself in the position of a countryman, and you're trying to figure out what kind of a king it is over you. And you see this guy, you know that this guy has betrayed the king. He's done something bad, and the king can kill him right there. And the king instead sends a different message. Jesus is confronted with justice versus mercy. The woman's caught in the very act of adultery. The law says we're to stone her. What do you say, Jesus? Jesus applied mercy. He went, he who among you has not sinned, cast the first stone. He then went to her and says, now go and sin no more. Okay? But the justice was overpowered by the mercy in that situation. And so the message you're going to give to the countrymen in your kingdom is going to do something, or is going to set in motion the atmosphere of what it means to live in that kingdom. Their feelings towards the king. In certain circumstances, like when George Washington, we had George Washington of our country, people were willing to die for him. Literally, people were willing to die for George Washington because they trusted him. He was a person of faith. He was a person that was fair with people. And so this is what Solomon's telling his boy here. He's saying, listen, the discretion of a man makes him slow to anger, and his glory is to overlook a transgression. Now, true, the king's wrath, next verse, is like the roaring of a lion. You can rule that way. However, but his favor is like the dew on the grass. Now think about, what's dew on the grass mean? It means the dew comes and it nourishes the grass, okay? It also provides for the insects and everything else down there, all right, so that they don't shrivel up and die. So the point being is the king has a choice on how he is going to lead. I wrote it this way. It is better to be slow to anger instead of exercising the wrath of a roaring lion. Overlooking a transgression is a sign of wisdom and mercy where appropriate. In other words, you just don't carte blanche go into things saying, well, I'm just going to show mercy every time. No, because then you're going to also create instability within your kingdom. Okay, it's kind of like where you say, let's fire all the police and let's let everybody go out of the jail. Okay, that's not wisdom. That's just stupidity. Okay, where appropriate. Showing favor will cause his kingdom to flourish. If he is known as a ruler who embraces mercy, the atmosphere will be conducive to respect and joy. So the king's having to make decisions here. And again, this is the transition we've taken. Basically, by introducing those 7 pillars that they're spelled out there again, it takes us back to the original things that Solomon was doing in terms of giving instruction to his son. And now he's doing it again. He's returning to that, but he's doing it at a deeper level, as we'll see. Verse 13, a foolish son is the ruin of his father, and the contentions of a wife are a continual dripping. Houses and riches are an inheritance from fathers, but a prudent wife is from the Lord. Now, if you look at that, what it sounds like, or what the direction you could go with this, okay, in interpreting it, a foolish son is the ruin of his father, and the contentions of a wife are a continual dripping. Meaning that if he's acting out as a fool, not only is it the ruin of his father, because his whole reputation is going to be, under, okay, because of the actions of the son. Then you can take it, and the contentions of wife are a continual dripping, meaning that the mother is so upset with him, she's continually ridiculing the husband, whether he deserves it or not. But I don't believe that's what is being said there. And the reason I don't is because of the next verse. Houses and riches are an inheritance from fathers, meaning that's where you have a leg up in terms of your inheritance. That comes from your father. But a prudent wife is from the Lord. He's contending here that he grows in wisdom and in the fear of the Lord, so he will be blessed. So I think what he's really saying there, where he says, in the contentions of a wife or a continual dripping, is he's saying, if you play the role of the fool, a foolish person, his feet hasten to destruction, basically. How are you going to choose a godly wife? You're not. you're going to end up with somebody that, here's your problem. It's like the dripping, where it says a wife or a continual dripping. It's like the water that drips in the ceiling, is continually coming in. Or as one person in the 3 o'clock said, it's like in war where they torture a person by having one drop of water coming continually on the person's forehead. In other words, it destroys. So I personally believe that the total context of that is he's trying to encourage him to walk faithfully before the Lord so that God can gift him with the appropriate wife. I wrote it this way: a foolish son destroys a father's reputation, and he may well choose foolishly his wife, who because of his being foolish will take over and ridicule him continually. Inherited advantage can give you luxury, that's the houses and riches, but God does not reward a fool with his blessing. And if by chance he does draw a prudent wife, how long till she wises up and leaves him? And the classic example of this, and I want to read this to you, it's a little lengthy, but it's the story of Nabal and Abigail. How many are familiar with the story of Nabal and Abigail? Who knows what the name Nabal means? Nope. Nabal means fool or senseless, okay? So that's what it means, and he's known as a churlish man, and a churlish man is a person who is rude, ungracious, mean-spirited. So that's who this guy is, and his very name fits in, because we're really talking about to the son of Solomon, don't play the fool, okay? Because this guy's going to play the fool. Here's his story. This is in 1 Samuel 25, starting with verse 2. Now there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel, and the man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. The name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife, Abigail. And she was a woman of good understanding. Well, that's right in the 7 pillars right there. And she was a woman of good understanding and beautiful appearance. But the man, Nabal, was harsh and evil in his doings. He was of the house of Caleb. When David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep, David sent 10 young men. And David said to the young men, go up to Carmel and go to Nabal and greet him in my name. And thus you shall say to him who lives in prosperity, peace be to you, peace to your house, and peace to all that you have. Now I have heard that you have shearers. Your shepherds were with us, and we did not hurt them, nor was there anything missing from them all the while they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. Please, give whatever comes to your hand to your servants and to your son David. So when David's young men came, they spoke to Nabal according to all these words in the name of David, and waited. Then Nabal answered David's servants and said, who is David, and who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants nowadays who break away each one from his master. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed from my shearers and give it to men when I do not know where they are from? So David's young men turned on their heels and went back, and they came and told him all these words. Then David said to his men, every man gird on his sword. So every man girded on his sword, and David also girded on his sword. And about 400 men, all with swords, went with David, and 200 stayed with the supplies. Now, one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, whoa, look, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, and he reviled them. But the men were very good to us, and we were not hurt, nor did we miss anything as long as we accompanied them when we were in the fields. They were a wall to us, both by night and day. All the time we were with them, keeping the sheep. Now, therefore, know and consider what you will do, for harm is determined against our master and against all his household, for he is such a scoundrel that one cannot speak to him. Then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep already dressed, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 clusters of raisins, 200 cakes of figs, and loaded them on donkeys. And she said to her servants, "Go on before me. See, I am coming after you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. So it was, as she rode on the donkey, that she went down under cover of the hill, and there were David and his men coming down toward her, and she met them. Now David had said, "Surely in vain I have protected all that this fellow was or has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belongs to him. And he has repaid me evil for good." We discussed that 2 weeks ago, I believe. The sin of repaying evil for good. "May God do so and more also to the enemies of David, if I leave one male of all who belong to him by morning light." In other words, 400 men, 400 swords are coming against this guy, and are going to slaughter every man that belongs to his company. Now when Abigail saw David, she dismounted quickly from the donkey, fell on her face before David, and bowed down to the ground. So she fell at his feet and said, "Oh me, my Lord, or on me, my Lord, on me let this iniquity be. And please let your maidservant speak in your ears, and hear the words of your maidservant. Please let not my Lord regard this scoundrel Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your maidservant, did not see the young men of my Lord whom you sent. Now therefore, my Lord, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, since the Lord has held you back from coming to bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hand, now then, let your enemies and those who seek harm for my Lord be as Nabal. And now this present which your maidservant has brought to my Lord, let it be given to the young men who follow my Lord. Please forgive the trespass of your maidservant, for the Lord will certainly make for my Lord an enduring house, because my Lord fights." And when she's saying my Lord, she's speaking to David as in that regard. "And evil is not found in you throughout your days. Yet a man has risen to pursue you," she's speaking of Saul, "and seek your life. But the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living." Now I want to stop right there for a second, because I was doing a word study on this, and it really was interesting. This saying is the favorite on Jewish headstones to this day. Right there, the bound in the bundle of the living. And the reason it is to me, it actually goes back to their departing of Egypt, where they took the things that they had, the most valuable things, and packaged them in a bundle. And so if you think about it, taking the very best that you have of the little that you have and starting out on your journey, I apply that to life's journey. And actually, commentators say that this is the first hint in the Old Testament in the Jewish faith that they saw things even in eternal terms, that somehow, like when David says, "I know that you shall not leave my soul in Sheol," the place of shadows, that this is an inkling of that. So that's a really interesting saying that right here, that bound in the bundle of life with the Lord your God in the lives of your enemies. He shall sling out as from the pocket of a sling. In other words, all she's saying there is that he's going to be victorious because he's doing things for God, and God's going to bless him. "And it shall come to pass, when the Lord has done for my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you ruler over Israel, that this will be no grief to you, nor offense of heart to my Lord, either that you have shed blood without cause, or that my Lord has avenged himself." In other words, she's calling for mercy. Okay? "But when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your maidservant." Then David said to Abigail, "Blessed is the Lord God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. And blessed is your advice, and blessed are you, because you have kept me this day from coming to bloodshed and from avenging myself with my own hand. For indeed, as the Lord God of Israel lives, who has kept me back from hurting you. Unless you had hurried and come to meet me, surely by morning light no males would have been left to Nabal. So David received from her hand what she had brought him, and said to her, Go up in peace to your house. See, I have heeded your voice and respected your person. Now Abigail went to Nabal, and there he was, holding a feast in his house like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. Therefore she told him nothing, little or much, until morning light. So it was in the morning, when the wine had gone from Nabal, and his wife had told him these things, that his heart died within him, and he became like a stone. Then it happened, after about 10 days, that the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. So when David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, Blessed be the Lord, who has pleaded the cause of my reproach from the hand of Nabal, and has kept his servant from evil. For the Lord has returned the wickedness of Nabal on his own head. And David sent and proposed to Abigail to take her as his wife. When the servants of David had come to Abigail at Carmel, they spoke to her, saying, David sent us to you to ask you to become his wife. Then she arose, bowed her face to the earth, and said, Here is your maidservant, a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord. So Abigail rose in haste and rode on a donkey, attended by 5 of her maidens, and she followed the messengers of David and became his wife. What a perfect illustration of what we're saying. Number one, the mercy. David showed mercy. And how many times, think about your own life, have maybe you are about to say the wrong thing, or you're about to do the wrong thing, and all of a sudden God has sent somebody or something to happen to cause it to change from what you were doing, and you were happy about it afterwards. So here, Abigail meets him, and she's obviously a prudent woman. She's a woman of understanding. And notice she takes the sin of Nabal on herself. Forgive me. Why? Because she's married to him. Okay? So in that regard, she humbles herself. And as a result of that, instead of living anymore with this guy, God strikes him dead, and she becomes the wife of the king. Or I should say one of the wives of the king. Okay? Kings did that back then, okay? And that one, just to make comment on that, Moses was warned by God. God told Moses before there was any kings, he said, tell the kings not to multiply wives nor multiply horses. One is a sign, they're both a sign of wealth, nobility, power, all of that, okay? But again, I think that is just a great illustration of you don't want to be a foolish person because you marry the wrong wife, because you're probably, whether you're in a drunken stupor when you marry her or you're just living off the craziness, that you're going to choose the wrong person. And if by chance you do choose the right person, how long is they going to live with you, knowing how foolish you are? Because the prudent woman will size up the situation. In this case, she saved a whole lot of men from being killed. Okay, verses 15 through 17. Laziness casts one into a deep sleep, and an idle person will suffer hunger. In other words, this is what I was saying a little while ago. Inherited advantage can produce almost like a spell on you, where you become dependent or trusting in that fortress that you have inherited, right? You're the richest man now. And again, he's speaking forward here. Solomon's speaking to the eventuality of this fellow being king. Laziness casts one into a deep sleep, and an idle person will suffer hunger. He who keeps the commandments keeps his soul, but he who is careless of his ways will die. And he who has pity on the poor lends to the Lord, and he will pay back what he has given. A famous verse. We use that verse all the time. The point here is he's speaking to him and it says, don't be lazy. Now, you could apply that to us. We here live in the United States of America. All of us have an inherited advantage. It doesn't matter. Compared to many other countries, we have an inherited advantage just living here, being able to make a living. Certainly the cost of living is hard here. But in terms of jobs and finances and security, we have an inherited advantage. And he's saying, don't allow that for you to become lazy. And you trust in that instead of trusting in the Lord. The trust of the Lord is where you are going to be blessed, whether it's in the choosing of a mate or whether it's in the way that people feel about you, because instead of being this big dictator, being governed by wrath, instead you're showing mercy. And it's like dew on the grass, okay? He who keeps the commandment keeps his soul. I'll say amen to that. But he who is careless of his ways will die. He who has pity on the poor lends to the Lord, and he will pay back what he has given. In other words, King, and this we saw last week or the week before, you're to treat the poorest of the poor in the same heart as you do the wealthiest of the wealthy. And he said oftentimes that wealthy person may be a wicked person. But the poor, if they have integrity, like we saw the servant, that could be lifted up to be equal to family members because they were loyal. And I shared this before. George Washington had that case. And some of his most trusted servants, when he died in his will, he left money to them as well as their freedom. Okay? So how we treat others is the bottom line of this chapter. And for a king, the kingdom's perpetuation is going to depend on his wisdom and him understanding what his dad is trying to share here. I wrote it this way. A foolish king lives off his inherited advantage and lives under the spell of false security. God's commandments take constant diligence, but we are rewarded with a healthy life and kingdom. Speaking of the king. Remember, a merciful king is like, quote, dew on the grass. Be merciful, especially to the poor, and you are on God's side and will be blessed. Verses 18 and following, chasten your son while there is hope, and do not set your heart on his destruction. And I really think he's being self-reflective there. He's also passing it on to his son about how he's to treat his future sons, but I think he's being a little self-reflective there. He's saying that, I've done my best to show you the right way to go. Okay? Chasten your son while there is hope, and do not set your heart on his destruction. In other words, by not showing or chastening, giving discipline, you're setting him up for destruction. A man of great wrath will suffer punishment, for if you rescue him, you will have to do it again. This is what I was talking about earlier. The repetitiveness of foolishness, and that people will just run away from you. They're not, whether it's a person, it's even a friend or blood relative, they learn through watching your foolishness that they don't want to help you in any regard. Sooner or later, you're just going to have to go out and either make it or not make it. You're either going to learn from your foolishness or something, and again, it gets to the fact that it creates lying, it creates bribing, it creates dishonesty in other forms. And so it's kind of like, woof, okay? Listen to counsel and receive instruction, that you may be wise in your latter days. There are many plans in a man's heart. Nevertheless, the Lord's counsel, that will stand, son. I'm putting the son in there. Son, do it the Lord's way. Gain wisdom, gain understanding, love mercy. Show yourself rightly approved, okay? I wrote down this because I read this in a book. As the twig is bent, so grows the tree. Think about that for a minute. As the twig is bent, think about you raising a little plant. And either you put it up straight and tall, or you have it off at an angle, and it's going to end up, if it bears fruit, falling to the ground, okay? As the twig is bent, so grows the tree. Or to put it another way, train a child from the time he is in the playpen, so he will stay out of the state pen. Right? I mean, that's another way of putting it. Listen, son, this is what I wrote. Listen, son, you cannot let wrath rule you. There are some mistakes made in wrath that we can't help, and some we won't help if you play the fool. Listen to others' counsel, and remember, your plans cannot supersede God's plans. Just like in choosing a wife, you want to be on the Lord's side, living righteously. Verses 22 through 24. What is desired in a man is kindness, and just put in king there. What is desired in a man or a king is kindness. And a poor man is better than a liar. The fear of the Lord leads to life. So this is now he's coming to the conclusion of this chapter, and he's just laying it out there. It's the fear of the Lord. That's what leads to true life, okay? And he who has it will abide in satisfaction. He will not be visited with evil. A lazy man buries his hand in the bowl and will not so much as bring it to his mouth again. And that's the picture of a guy that, again, inherited advantage. He's got all this, and he can create so many things that other people can't. But he's in a different type of mentality, a different type of lifestyle. It certainly pictures a person with what was said about Nabal. Remember, Abigail comes home, and he's having a feast like a king, and he's thoroughly drunk, And so that's what's pictured here. The picture is of a guy with his hand in the bowl, but because he's in this feast thing, right, he passes out, and the next thing you find his head in the bowl. Okay, you find his hand, his head, everything. In other words, he's squandering the very privilege that he's been given. Instead of being concerned about the people he's serving, he's concerned only about debauchery and foolishness. Kindness, this is what I wrote. Kindness will reap true rewards. Liars will bring shame. A poor, kind king is richer than a wealthy king with no character. The fear of the Lord will protect you better than all the gold of Ophir. Don't be lazy. You will waste your advantage. And the reason I put the gold of Ophir, it's spelled O-P-H-I-R, is found in 4 different books of the Old Testament. And it is what is said the majority of Solomon's wealth came from the gold of Ophir. And they believe it was somewhere in the Middle East, and believe me, there's plenty of gold in the Mideast. Okay, I know Andrew, when he sent us pictures, videos of him in like Bahrain and what's that other really rich place that people go to in there? Qatar, no, not UAD, yes, but there's one that stands out as the place that people go to, the Las Vegas of the Mideast. Anyway, he showed, as he's going through the markets, this thing with, it was just, this guy was a gold dealer. And it was the most gold you would ever imagine you could see. It was just lining all these rows of gold, 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 gold. So evidently the gold of Ophir came from one of those areas way back when, and that was the majority of Solomon's wealth, okay? And I said, you will waste your advantage. Let's close it out. The final verses, 25 through 29. Strike a scoffer, and the simple will become wary. Rebuke one who has understanding, and he will discern knowledge. He who mistreats his father and chases away his mother is a son who causes shame and brings reproach. Cease listening to instruction, my son, and you will stray from the words of knowledge. And I wrote, son, you have been taught understanding. Don't cease from your pursuit of wisdom. Make your parents proud. I think that's what it's really saying there in closing. Make your parents proud. You've been given advantage. Use that advantage correctly. Strike a scoffer, and the simple will become wary. Yes, rebuke one who is understanding, and he will discern knowledge. In other words, that's reproof. That's what we have to do. A wise person loves rebuke or loves reproof. If it's real, then one grows through it. And then he goes on to say, it's almost to me like he's saying, where I say, make your parents proud. He says, he who mistreats his father and chases away his mother is a son who causes shame and brings reproach. Cease listening to instruction, my son, and you will stray from the words of knowledge. And this whole thing is about giving instruction. The whole book of Proverbs is. Last 2 verses. A disreputable witness scorns justice, and the mouth of the wicked devours iniquity. Judgments are prepared for scoffers, and beatings for the backs of fools. So he's got a choice. He's got a choice of who he's going to be and how he's going to run the kingdom. Okay? A disreputable witness, a disreputable witness, what did I mean there? A disreputable witness scorns justice, and the mouth of the wicked devours iniquity. That means that's all he wants. That's what he's hungry for. But judgments are prepared for scoffers, and beatings for the backs of fools. So I close with this comment. Don't play the fool and scoff at wisdom. Judgments and beatings will come to you. The ungodly feast on evil and shun justice. You are better than that. That's the summation of it. Come on, son, you're better than that. Questions or thoughts? Okay, before I do that, thank you for being with us tonight. We have finished now the 19th chapter, and we're going to go into the 20th chapter next week. We invite you to come back. Also, we encourage you to read the 20th chapter before tuning in, because I use the simple analogy that if the person goes to the gym and watches all the people doing the weights and using the elliptical and so forth, and then sits there and 2 months later wonders why they haven't grown in strength or in a better shape, it's rather obvious. They never really entered in. So read the 20th chapter, and if you find things that are difficult, just go to Google and put in the verse. Say, so-and-so verse, meaning. I would encourage you, don't go by what AI says, but skip down and get an actual biblical commentary, because it's usually the second one down. Gives you a choice of biblical commentaries or multiple commentaries, and they'll explain, especially root words of hard words to understand. Also tell you the difference that a word meant in that culture, meaning the 1600s, when the King James Version was written, versus now. So there's tools that you can have to actually study to show yourself approved, a workman not needing to be ashamed, but rightly dividing the word of truth. God bless you, and we'll see you next week.